Sorry, next Tuesday is Election Day in Kansas City. There are several issues on the ballot for us to talk about. In KCMO, one issue voters will decide on is whether or not to renew the city earnings tax.
This morning, Bryant Madrick taking a closer look at what your tax dollars get you with this tax. Bryant, good morning. I think this election may have slipped some people's minds. Bring us up to speed on what they're voting on Tuesday.
Yeah, that's right. So we're talking about basic city services. Think trash pickup, pothole repairs, and paying for first responders, police and firefighters. Some of those basic services you may not think about, but certainly rely on. And if you live in Kansas City, you probably got this flyer in the mail urging you to vote yes. City leaders, they can't campaign for this, but they certainly would like you to vote yes. And they say that if you vote no, you'll likely see and feel the effects. It's another busy day at Hyde Park Auto Service. One issue driving business? Potholes.
We had one winter where it just kept freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing, and potholes were terrible that year. So it hasn't been quite as bad this year, but we've seen our fair share for sure.
Kansas City knows about this pesky problem. And even though most of us have spent the past year in our homes, Service Advisor Elliot Dill is still seeing victims of the costly craters.
The most common thing is just flat tires. You know, you go over a bad pothole and blow out a tire, so that's probably the most common thing we see.
Seeing potholes filled is also common, but it costs money. Money that also pays for first responders and other services.
Retaining the earnings tax is essential for us. This is not your normal tax issue election. This is something that is core to city operations, has been core to city operations for years.
City leaders expect nearly $270 million to be generated by the earnings tax this fiscal year. Because of the pandemic, that's $23 million less than what the tax normally generates. Mayor Quentin Lucas says if you vote no, the outcome won't be pretty.
We are stuck either substantially reducing expenditures to the tune of $300 million. That's more than the Kansas City Police Department and other city department combined, or we increase taxes precipitously.
Not a pretty picture. Now, first of all, this is not a new tax, it's a renewal. Comes up every 5 years. In fact, voters said yes the last time this came up before voters back in 2016. Now, because of the pandemic, as I mentioned in the story, the city has received a hit in finances. $23 million lost. Well, the city says that thanks to the federal government, some money will be coming back to the city. That should hold them over and hopefully make up for some of that lost revenue for at least 2 years. Taylor, Lindsay?
So, Bryant, who pays the earnings tax?
That's an important question. So first of all, when it comes to voting, of course, people who live in Kansas City, Missouri will be voting for this. However, people fall into 3 categories. Residents who live in the city, people who work in the city but may live elsewhere. You can live in Overland Park, but if you work in Kansas City, Missouri, you also will be paying for this. And people who do business in the city. If you own a business, you do any kind of business in Kansas City, Missouri, you also will be paying the earnings tax. So 3 different categories to keep in mind.